After her long soak in the tub, she opened her wardrobe to put on a dress. It was proving to be a gloriously sunny day, and she felt like a town book sale demanded. She made a little more effort with her appearance. After all, her community were getting the first glimpses of the outsider. She had been here a couple weeks, cooped up in this cottage, surrounded by the mess and eating microwave food and oven meals. A trip to suss out the local shops was not a bad idea. She could pick up something fresh, maybe even some cakes, and take Muffin for a stroll beyond the gravel road that led out onto the main road from her own tree-covered nook, pulling out a fitted baby pink sundress which flared out from the waist and brushed her knees. She slid her feet into matching flat pumps and brushed out her long dark hair, pinning it up the back of her head loosely, so tendrils fell around her face. Her skin had tanned to a lovely shade from all the garden work the last couple of days, and she applied minimum makeup. A spritz of her favorite perfume, a quick glance in the mirror to approve how she looked with a satisfied nod. She grabbed a cream-colored canvas shoulder bag to throw her purse in and girly essentials, like strawberry lip balm and sunscreen spray. She picked up her baby pink framed sunglasses, Audrey Hepburn style, and picked up Muffin and his leash. Ready to rumble, Rose was singing to herself tunelessly when she swept out to her car. With dog in tow, her little pink Minnie shone in the sunlight in front of the cottage, relieved to be free of both boxes and roof rack and crying out to be driven. Lovely and clean from her morning washing and polishing it days before, Rose had always had a pink obsession, since childhood, always obsessed with all things pink, girly, and sparkly. Her car had been her one indulgence in London, going for a baby pink tiny car that suited her girly, all things cute obsession. She had hated that every male she had dated criticized it, and it was partially why none of them made it beyond 2 weeks with her. Blaring the summer hits CD, she pulled out with Muffin in the passenger seat and headed along the road. Pulling out into the main road and reaching speed quickly, she was singing and smiling at how free she felt, energized by this impromptu outing and the glorious sunshine, which was not typical for Scotland this early in the summer. It was truly shaping up to be a wonderful day. Out of nowhere, the nose of a black car poked out in front of her from the tree-edged hedgeway, causing her to swerve and scream as she tried to hit the brakes in alarm. Her car skidded halfway across the road with an almighty screech before slamming to a halt, and Rose fell forward on her steering wheel, trying to catch her breath. Sure, she had just suffered a major heart attack. Grabbing at Muffin to feel he was still in one piece, her hands began shaking violently, and her heart pounded through her chest. Trying to keep her head on the wheel to steady her breathing and calm her nerves, she could feel her rage rising. Who in the actual hell? What the actual F? Her car door was ripped open from beside her, causing her to snap up and around and glare angrily into the steel-colored eyes facing her, which had suddenly appeared a little too closely. Are you oh? A smooth and deep voice that sounded genuinely concerned tried to infiltrate her red haze. But she had already hit maximum rage. What in the actual hell are you doing? She screeched at the face before her, not really taking in the jet black hair, tan skin, or intense gray eyes belonging to the tall stranger. Ordinarily, this kind of sexy would have put Rose in a slump of panting hormones, but Rose just saw red. You could have killed me. Are you aware that road is a 60? You pulled out into traffic on a goddamn 60. She pulled herself out of her seat, releasing her belt to square her small 5'4" to the huge 6-foot frame before her, anger searing her every nerve at the sheer stupidity of the man. He quickly stood back, looking almost shocked as she continued to yell at him about his idiotic driving maneuver with hands firmly on her hips and letting fiery Rose loose. Whoa there, Penelope! Splaying his hands in defense as he tried to calm her rant. Look, I'm sorry. I'm sure I got as much of a shock as you. Most folks know how bad the view is for me coming out and cross to the other side to pass the manor opening. He was defensively moving away from Rose as she continued to wave her hands about, cursing at him about recklessness. and moronic men with stupidly fast and flashy cars. Rose was on a roll. She stopped suddenly, realizing something he had said. "Who the hell is Penelope?" She blinked in confused fury, but he only laughed at her sudden change in persona, then tried to smother it with a cough. "Smooth move, mister." "Asshole. God, you're hot." Rose had only just seemed to notice this little fact. Now that she was inches from him, his whole shocked manner seemed to do a sudden flip into smiling, good-humored, if not a little embarrassed, but Rose was beyond oblivious in her mental state. "You." "Sorry, it's just pink car, pink dress, fiery little lady who comes out like a bat out of hell, like she's about to rip my head off." The handsome stranger stood, with hands up defensively, smiling at her, like it was the most obvious thing in the world to everyone except her. Rose stood motionless, cluelessness and confusion all over her face, which only added to her internal irritation at his far too good-looking smugness. Penelope pit-stopped from wacky races. He tried again to get her brain to connect to whatever the hell he was talking about. "Look, never mind. It's just, that's what I thought when I opened your door." He was laughing now in a rather deep and husky way which only enraged her more and brought out another bout of fury. "Screw you and your stupid wacky whatever's next time. Watch where you're going, asshole, or next time I won't swerve." She turned and threw herself back into her car in the most unladylike manner, attempting to grab her door so she could dramatically slam it. All previous ounces of rage reconnected with her inner diva. But he grabbed it first. "Allow me." He slammed it shut, with the force of a guy who had reconnected with anger. The humor absent from his face and replaced with "I'm pissed off, lady." Their eyes glinted at one another angrily, fire meeting fire, sparks igniting in the air around them, and almost crackling with the collision. Rose didn't wait for any further conversation. Putting metal to the floor, she sped off without any hesitation, almost taking him out with her wing mirror in the process, and giving zero cares about it. Rose wasn't sure why this guy had invoked such a furious response, but all she wanted was to put a huge sea of distance between her and that smug laugh and get rid of the ball of internal anger writhing inside of her. She could see the arrogant sod in her mirror, shaking his head after her, watching her drive off before walking back to his flashy black car and sliding back in with the grace of a cougar. "Asshole!" she screeched loudly, angered at the sheer, effortless grace the idiot was displaying. Muffin was looking at her with his wide, wise eyes, almost telling her she had simply lost the plot. "Well, he is, mister. I'm so good-looking with my big muscles and sports car and expensive clothes. So Mr. Smooth that I think I can give you a cute pet name, and you forget I almost killed you." She slapped her wheel, eyes darting from the road to rear view mirror manically as she tried not to cause further accident with stupid driving. "Fuck you." "Ow, that actually hurt." She lifted her fingers to her mouth and blew them gently in a bid to soothe the burning self-inflicted pain, releasing some of her tension as she did so. That almost crash had given her a massive fright, and her reaction since had been some sort of delayed mental breakdown, brought on by a near-death experience. Being confronted by a guy who was far too handsome for an early morning rural drive had just added to her extreme reaction. I mean, who the hell was he? Wearing designer clothes and a flashy car, and looking a little too suave for the Highlands. Men like him were normally arrogant Londoners, and she had met enough of them to last a lifetime. Pushing that irritatingly flawless face out of her mind's eye, she suddenly felt remorseful for swearing angrily in front of Muffin, and sat back in her chair, trying to release the tightness of her muscles. Flexing her shoulders and tilting her head from side to side to flex her neck, slow, steady, and calming breaths, and internal chanting to cool her jets. The black sports car appeared in her rear-view mirror, coming up behind her fast, and she instantly tensed back up, teeth gritting and eyes narrowing angrily. Putting the foot down, she sped away from him before reaching the sign for the town and slowing back down again as she passed it. Completely pointless, but satisfying to say the least, riled by the way this man made her feel. Throwing daggers from her eyes in the mirror, she slowed to 30 and meandered through town, looking for a car park as the car behind her turned off at the huge museum. She sighed with relief at his departure. Hot or not, I don't need you behind me today, asshole. She muttered to no one in particular and hit the indicator to turn into a big half-empty car park. Within minutes, Rose found a space easily and expertly deposited her car, latching Muffin's lead on and exiting gracefully with a much sunnier disposition. Although the town was bustling with pedestrians, it seemed most came via a little free bus from surrounding areas, and not many drove. The streets were quiet from traffic and felt peaceful, despite the people milling around. Wandering about, she soon managed to navigate her surroundings. Quaint little shops ranging from the normal grocery stores to little cute boutiques, home decor, crafts, and tourist shops. Several cafes and a huge bakery shop that sat very close to the car park she had used. It was a pretty and picturesque little town, lots of barrels filled with flowers and park benches to pretty it up, and lots of potted trees and quaint old-fashioned street lamps. It was more beautiful than even her memories, and she could see the appeal for tourists. This was proper Highland charm right here. She decided to browse the shops first, before going in pursuit of the church she had yet to see, buying the odd necessity, and really getting a feel for the place. Rose was happy to find that although it wasn't exactly the small town of her childhood memories, it was enough unchanged that she got a familiar tug of emotion deep in the pit of her stomach. Just the same, this had been Olivia's favorite place. She would have loved to see that it was thriving, but still held all the same charm as before, as though caught in a time warp. After successfully not finding the church in the small town, and seeing a lack of mulling locals, Rose decided to head to the coffee shop, situated in the bakery, to rest her weary feet. It wasn't signposted, and there were no obvious roofs rising above the rest to indicate where the church would be. She had put Muffin back in the car with a bowl of water, a new bone, the windows opened, and the radio on before coming to get something to eat and ask for directions. She was sure that in this little place her car and the dog would be safe from a break-in. Besides, her alarm was loud and immobilized her car easily, and although Muffin wasn't much of a guard dog, he did have this incredibly scary toothy face he pulled when he was frightened and tried his version of a broken growl. If nothing more, it would scare away any lingerers. It did make him look a little rabid and possibly mentally unhinged. As soon as she opened the door, the smell of newly baked bread and fancies hit her like a warm hug. She wanted to fall into that smell. It was so heavenly, and had memories flooding back and filling her up with so much warmth, chasing away the last ounces of anger. She could almost feel herself transported back to her childhood, and eagerly swept in to see if they still stocked her favorite cakes. The tables were almost all empty, with the odd couple or group sitting far apart, quietly chatting and oblivious to her entrance. There was a relaxed, friendly atmosphere, despite being a complete stranger here, and she felt better that no one was openly staring and pointing as she had feared. The girl behind the counter, dressed in a green uniform reminiscent of school dinner, lady smiled at Rose as she approached, with no expression other than friendly. "Hi there, what can I get for ya today?" the girl asked in a polite, yet very heavily accented brogue that suggested she had grown up in the farms surrounding the town. "Hi, can I have a jam tart and a hot chocolate, please?" "Thank you." Rose smiled back and pulled her purse from her shoulder bag, breathing in the fresh ground coffee bean smell wafting her way. "Sure thing. We'll just be 2 ticks for yay." The girl turned on her heel and moved off to arrange Rose's order on a tray, allowing her a moment to properly look around the clean surroundings. Glancing around, she took in the bright, simple decor. The mint-colored walls and dark wood floor, which all seemed new. The cases of fancy patisseries and treats and the huge display case, showcasing elaborately decorated cakes for seasons and celebrations. It didn't have small town oozing from it, and it saddened Rose a little. This bakery had been one of her favorite places to come on a weekend with her aunt, back when it had been a small corner shop and not the huge one she now stood within. The bakery her aunt had loved had been small and quaint, and had obviously grown into the neighboring shops over time, to accommodate more seating and bigger kitchens. The woman who used to run it had been an Italian woman called Bella, a large round warm lady who had enveloped little Rose in cuddles and always satisfied her sweet tooth with a cream cake when they had come. Rose guessed, this is what success looked like when a small-town bakery managed to keep going for decades. As she looked around at the modern art and clean, simple window dressings, Rose was suddenly aware of the young woman at the window table, smiling at her openly. Rose glanced away awkwardly, assuming she was smiling to someone behind Rose, but a quick look showed no one had come in behind her, and she was the only one standing there. Rose looked back again, catching the girl's eye, and gained another bright smile. This time Rose smiled back and returned her gaze to the counter as her hot chocolate and strawberry tart was placed on the tray in front of her. Rose took the little round wooden tray with its paper-laced doily and moved off, looking to choose a seat. The girl beckoned to her with a waving hand, catching her eye and tapped the table, showing she was offering her a seat. Rose hesitated, then followed the gesture and approached shyly. "Hi!" She got close and slid her tray on the table opposite the dark-haired stranger. "Hi! There!" The girl smiled the most dazzling smile Rose had ever seen, all perfect straight white teeth and pretty pouted lips, although there was something vaguely familiar about it. She had long black hair, the color of raven feathers, pale flawless skin with peachy blushed cheeks and dazzling green eyes that sparkled out at you mischievously. She was dressed casually, and it made her appear very young. She was young. Maybe in her early 20s or late teens and stunningly beautiful in a casual, naive sort of way. She extended her hand, announcing her name was Abby. Abigail, but everyone called her Abby. That she was killing time and could do with the company. "I'm Rose Turner. I just moved into the little cottage at the main road as you enter the village." She smiled back at the pretty face and saw her nod, hinting she knew exactly which cottage. "It's really nice to see a new young face, especially a girl. We don't get many newcomers." Abby beamed her way, lifting her mug and sipping down some coffee. Rose felt an instant ease with this girl, a genuine friendliness. Conversation soon began to flow, and Abby told Rose she was studying art history, held up textbooks from the seat beside her as if to prove her story was legit. There was a book face down on the table in front of her, and a plate with a half-eaten chocolate donut, and now empty coffee mug. She was waiting for her brother, collecting her after 4 and loved to spend her free time in Bella's bakery. Rose absolutely loved this girl's down-to-earth, straight-shooting attitude and genuine openness. She had always found the people in this village to be like this. Rose was thrilled to hear Bella was still around and still owned this place. She learned that Abby was 19 and incredibly easy to talk to, sweet and genuine. That despite looking very young, she was very mature and well-spoken. Her accent, although typical for around here, had a slight upper-class clearness to it. Much like the male strangers this morning, the girls found conversation flowed effortlessly and had an immediate connection. Both were artists and loved to paint. Both obsessed with the sunflower painting by Van Gogh, and both didn't like abstract art in the slightest. Abby oohed and ahed over Rose's dress and almost died of envy when she told her that her car was pink too. "Rob told me he'd never let me have a pink car." She laughed. "He said it would embarrass his manly self to take it for maintenance. Of course, because I would be completely incapable of doing such things, being a woman," she joked with a slow shake of her head and a sigh. An obvious look of sibling love in her eyes when she said his name. "So Rob is your brother?" Rose inquired, trying to imagine her own older brothers being that way so many years before. It had been a long time since her two brothers and she shared the same time zone, let alone home. Why did that name ring a bell? Rob. Yes, older pain-in-the-ass brother who sometimes thinks he's my dad. She smiled, moving her book aside and leaning her elbows on the table. I mean, my dad's still around, but Rob takes care of all of us. My mum passed away when I was 14 and he just sort of took over. Dad was a mess and well, he's in his 70s now, so it made sense. She looked far away for a moment, then returned to reality, returned from a moment of sadness that Rose knew only too well. Missing a loved one was something you never got over. Dad married a younger woman, you see. She winked cheekily. Rob was born when Dad was already in his late 40s and well, I came in his late 50s. She shrugged. I guess they wanted more kids in between, but it never happened. So just the two of us in that big house, and then Dad, of course. The rest of the family lives further away. It's nice, though, that he's so protective and you're obviously close. Both my brothers live abroad. One in the RAF. He's currently in America, and the other emigrated to Australia to become a marine biologist. My parents live in Edinburgh, so I'm here all on my lonesome. Rose couldn't help but notice the effortless way the two women had just slipped into sharing life stories. It really felt as if she had always known Abby. I couldn't imagine not having family around me all the time. Don't you get lonely or scared? Abby scrutinized Rose's face seriously, trying to figure out the girl. I'm used to it. I lived in London for 6 years to further my career, and I didn't really make many friends. The life was too fast-paced, and everyone just wanted to succeed or party. I missed normal, slow living and genuine people. Rose took a mouthful of her drink and watched Abby toy with her empty mug. You sound like Rob. He lived in Glasgow for a couple years when he went to uni to study business. He said he couldn't wait to come home and just get back to home life, the town and the manor. It suddenly hit Rose sitting there, that one tiny word within a sentence. Manor. This was Abigail Munro. She was the Laird's sister, running through the scene earlier in her head and piecing the fragments together in a split second. She felt her stomach lurching as it clicked into place. That familiar smile, that black hair, and although the eyes were not gray, she had his eyes. That same cheeky look when he smiled. The hint of dimples when she smiled. Just like his. That flawless skin and attractive bone structure. The easy confidence and the upper-class dialect, which was not common around here. Surely, he couldn't be. Could he? He'd been leaving the Munro estate, and he did say, most people know I have a bad view of the road. Or something along those lines. Rose felt the color drain from her face as it sunk in that her first encounter of the day with the asshole had not been just any asshole, but this lovely girl's brother and the laird of her new hometown, the laird, who had invited her to his ball. Are you okay? The look of concern on Abby's face only struck it home, so alarmingly like his. Damn. Even the same question as he had yanked open her car door. They were so alike it was traumatizing. Rose feigned a smile and then let her head drop into her palms, groaning aloud. She felt like a moron, prize A idiot, and this sudden dawning of events had her reeling with regret. She felt Abby's hand touch her arm, concerned her new friend was having some sort of mental breakdown. I met him, she mumbled, covering her face and trying to rub away the realization. The urge to pour her own hot chocolate over her head swiftly coming over her. Rob? She could almost hear the surprise in Abby's tone. Yes, he almost killed me with his car this morning. And then, Penelope? The sound of his deep, familiar voice moved her to jump up right off the table, snapping her head up to meet his tall figure coming towards her from the open door. Shocked into momentary silence by the sight of him towering at the side of the table right next to her. Larger than life, so close she caught her breath. his sudden presence making her feel hot and bothered, flustered with no real reason, except that maybe he was a little bit hot in a sculpted white shirt, rolled up at the sleeves and some super snug on the ass jeans. Both Abby and his eyes glued to her face with a look of concern, strikingly similar, yet not. One was extremely feminine, and one extremely masculine. In the disturbingly male way that made women like Rose lose all compos mentis. "Are you okay?" Both of them, almost in unison. Oh God! It was undeniable that they were related. She slid her chair out quickly, mumbling some incoherent reason for getting going and avoiding looking him in the face as she tried to slide by. Caught between embarrassment, awkwardness, and just sheer cringe factor. Now she could fully see him without the red veil of rage she had to admit. He was romance hero worthy. "I'm absolutely fine. No thanks to you and your dangerous driving. Where did you get your license?" A lucky bag. She surprised herself with her venomous reaction as she saw the storm move into his eyes again, clearing away the concern to be replaced with a matched annoyance, fury to challenge her own, burning between them like a beast about to erupt, self-combusting fire. "So I see. Not lying there dying or passing out from a concussion as I feared, but alive and spitting just like earlier. And I could ask you the same thing, Penelope. I'm sure driving 80 on the road to town was highly responsible." His angry glare sent prickles up her spine, that smug face only inches from hers. Her breathing hitched. "Just trying to get away from you, in case once again your idiot driving caused me to crash." She thrust her hands on her hips in a show of bravado and pulled her small height up to meet him head-on. "Getting away from me is becoming a habit today." Rob crossed his arms across that massive expanse of male muscle and leaned back on his heel. Somehow it only angered her more. "Yup, absolutely," she spat. "Great. Don't let me stop you." He stepped back, giving her some much-needed breathing space. Sparks sizzling in the air between them with no real sense at all to the anger fueling the scene. No real argument in the petty comments, just rage, heat, and sparks. She had no idea why this guy made her so angry. Every nerve in her body reacting like hot piercing needles, and the urge to smash a mug on his head. His overly good-looking face absolutely screamed for her to throw her drink in it. It seemed they both evoked that reaction in each other. He moved out of the way, gesturing her exit dramatically, almost bowing as he nodded, and murmured some incoherent insult. To which she spat one back before marching off with a bag in hand, twisting the handle like it was his neck. Oh my God, he was a complete jerk, arrogant sod with his sultry cold eyes piercing like daggers. Poor Abby sat watching this whole scene in absolute disbelief, Rob her normally laid-back, gentle and well-mannered brother. This seemingly nice girl who had just spent a half hour acting like old friends. They had turned to instant fire and brimstone in each other's presence. She had no clue what to say to diffuse the situation, but just sat there agog, the tension between them sending off an electric atmosphere like she had never experienced. Abby raised a knowing eyebrow at Rob and a tiny smirk. Rob frowned a what? At her in aggravation. Rose stalked out in a very dramatic fashion in a flurry of ruffled petticoats, leaving half of her drink and cake sitting and almost taking out seats with her swinging handbag. Abby just sat staring at Rob in bewilderment. He told her he would wait for her in the car, then stormed off in an equally bad mood, taking the opposite direction to Rose. Walking out the door only seconds behind the pink-clad woman, and glaring at her walking away as he stalked to his own car. Rose drove home, gripping her steering wheel and cursing under her breath like a demented maniac, trying to remove the feeling of his hands on her body, hating the way it still felt as though she could feel him touching her, ignoring the rosy blush which had spread up her chest and cheeks and the warmth low down in her pelvis. The feeling she couldn't explain happening inside of her. Common sense, batting the observations away. Rose was still spitting nails at home an hour later. She had come home almost ripping her dress off, trying to remove the feeling of him on her skin, and was systematically scrubbing every inch of her living room like a fevered, crazy person on a mission. No one had ever ignited this kind of response in her, and she was damned if she was going to dissect it in any way at all. Instead, she was trying to power shift it out of her very core with exertion. She had hauled the covers and plastic from the old leather couch finally, and pulled it into place by the fire, had dragged the mismatched armchair to the other side, and started ripping into random boxes in a mad rage, determined to put all the pent-up energy into something productive. 3 hours later, she was still slamming around, dragging tables around, moving footstools from the closet, and dragging out an array of thick woolen throws. All heaped on the floor, she really had no method to her madness. Just a need to pull things, rip things, and use a box cutter to stab at cardboard aggressively. Muffin had sensed the psychotic rage and had been hiding under the bed since their return. He was happy with a huge bone the butcher had gifted him. He knew a crazy woman on a cleaning mission when he saw one and knew best to keep a distance. It was the sharp knock at her door, which brought her back to reality with a swift slap. It was pitch black outside. She had seen no headlights appear on the gravel road in front of the house, and it was getting late. This sudden realization of her own vulnerability was sobering. A lone woman in a remote and dark area, with no one to call for help, cooling her hot temper and making her simmer back down to an almost submissive state. She tried to peer out the window, pushing the curtains aside, but could only make out a dark figure. Damn! She needed lights out there. Going to the door, she called out bravely, aware that it could be anyone, praying that wandering psychopaths were few and far between in the Highlands, keeping her hand on the lock and asking who was there. She was relieved at Abby's response and opened the door to the girl whose arms were laden with a brown bag filled to bursting, the most welcome sight she had ever seen. An instant surge of genuine happiness and joy. "Can I come in for a few minutes?" Abby looked nervous and awkward, but Rose smiled and pulled her in from the dark and cool night air enthusiastically. Her smile wide and encouraging. She was actually so happy to see her again, and the anger and pent-up need to massacre boxes dispersed at the sight of her, like a calming breeze. She had wondered how she would get in touch with the girl again after the way she had left things. Abby looked around the hall as she came in, noticing the art and canvases on the wall, all painted by Olivia Gray. Her aunt had been an amazing fine artist in oil paints. That had been Rose's first mission, her first week here, her inspiration and joy. A gallery of her most treasured L.T. Marshall paintings to warm her heart when coming and going. A reminder of that amazing figure in her life and a way to keep her with her, motioning for Abby to follow and relieving her from the burden of the brown bag. They moved through to the living room, Rose apologizing for the mess and clearing some cushions from the couch so they could sit. Abby complimented the efforts at getting it cozy and admired some of Rose's new purchases, cushions, candles, and trinkets. She had only ever been at this cottage as a small child many years ago. Olivia had given her some tuition in drawing at her father's expense, but she still remembered it vaguely. Abby dipped into the bag full of cakes and donuts from a nameless shop and explained she would have been around earlier. She had gone away with Rob for a bit, while he sorted some business in the next town, and was only just back. He had dropped her at the opening of Rose's Road, knowing she was coming here. It seemed the whole town knew who Rose was now. Strangers didn't stay that way for long in a town like this. Everyone knew everyone, and everyone knew their business before long. And he was okay with that? Rose was surprised. Why not? I like you, even if he doesn't. Abby smiled, throwing a wink at her, the hint of cheekiness behind those sparkling eyes. Rose bashed her with a soft cushion, and they both laughed. There was something so familiar about Abby. An old friend returned, and it had made for an instant ease between them. Rose tried to ignore the bitter knot in her stomach that Rob Munro didn't like her. She tried to convince herself it was because the feeling was mutual, and he simply left a bad taste in her mouth. I'm sorry about acting like such a crazy weirdo at the bakery, Abby. He just seems to bring it out of me. Rose felt her cheeks redden, fidgeting with the glazed donut she was turning in her fingers. Rob seems to do that to women. Don't worry about it. You said he almost wiped your car out. I would have been pissed too. Abby gave her a reassuring smile and patted her knee in a very mature manner. Rob's my brother, so I know better than most that he can be an asshole. You don't need to apologize at all, Rose. Both girls regarded each other for a second and broke into wide smiles. Coffee. Rose offered brightly, relieved that Abby was understanding, and Abby nodded. If it's not a bother, I mean if you're busy, I can head off. Abby smiled politely. Don't be daft, I really could use the company. Rose smiled and beckoned the girl after her as she made her way to the small kitchen. Abby, lifting the bag and following her, seemed relieved. There was an immediate sense of calm and companionship, no awkward silence or uneasiness. You know, though. Abby butted into Rose's thoughts as she hauled out cups and coffee granules to fill them. Rob isn't really one to spark quite so quickly. You two certainly have a fire. Abby watched Rose carefully, every movement of the teaspoon as though waiting for a reaction. A strange look and a twinkle in Abby's eye. Rose could almost swear it was a look of mischief. I think what we have is mutual dislike, instant disagreeability. I'm very partial to my car and not being run off the road. Rose threw her an airy look and tried to steer the topic away from the man who was currently making her heart beat up a gear. So tell me this, Ball. Are you attending? Do you want a date? Abby broke into a wide grin. Don't I ever. That would be so much better than being a third wheel with Rob and whomever he drags along. I'm currently man, less and it pretty much sucks. Abby slid into one of the kitchen chairs and began laying out the pastries on the platter Rose had put out. Rose finished up with the mugs of coffee and brought them over, sliding into the chair opposite and mirroring Abby's casual slump. You're kidding, right? How can a girl looking like you not have a date? Rose raised eyebrows with genuine surprise. Abby was stunning. Are you calling me pwetty? Abby jested with kissing noises and lots of dramatic eye fluttering. Seriously though, people in this town tend to give me a wide berth. When my mum died, I became a bit of a loner, and people are just used to leaving me alone. I think boys think I'm weird. She gulped down some hot liquid and messed with the handle of her mug. That's understandable. Maybe people didn't know how to approach you. People aren't good with grief. They never know what to say, especially younger folks. Rose lifted her mug and turned it in her palms, enjoying the heat it gave off and remembering the awkwardness of her flatmates when she had news of Olivia's car accident. You sound like a granny saying things like that, Abby jested. What, are you like 50? She poked with a twinkle in her eye and a cheeky wink. 28 actually. Cheeky. Rose dipped her fingers in her hot coffee and flicked them at Abby childishly, smiling as she did so. Old then. Not as old as Rob, but almost. You two are totally ready for slippers by the fire and matching bathrobes. Abby flicked some sugar from her donut back at Rose and received a pout in response. Shut up, weirdo. I guess it's a date. We can be sad and single together. Maybe it'll be you and I buying matching bathrobes soon enough. Rose giggled at that, and Abby only cheered. I actually like the sound of that. It's about time I had a real decent girlfriend. Most of the chicks my age suck. They either moon over my brother or just want to know how much money he's worth. She pouted and blew a strand of hair off her forehead in the most childish manner. I promise to do neither of those things. If you're lucky, I may even be persuaded to go to second base at the party. Abby laughed at Rose's joke. Then, I am most definitely taking you. Abby jested with a wink and a smile, and both girls laughed. Somehow, the conversation seemed to flow even more fluidly after that, lost with a cup in hand and cakes on a plate. The subjects they covered were vast and random. Two minds alike in so many ways, both with a quick sense of humor. They went through 2 pots of tea and more than half of the confectionery, giggling like schoolgirls, and finding the most insane things to talk about as the time drew on, and they chatted and laughed, finding more in common than they ever thought possible. Abby had a quick wit about her, a cheeky tongue and almost verging on the crude when it came to her jokes. She was refreshing and honest, and said exactly what she meant. There was no second guessing. She was upfront and didn't mince her words, which Rose absolutely loved. She was the kind of friend that Rose missed having, the kind she had left behind in Edinburgh to embark on a career so many years ago as a freelance illustrator. When Abby's phone lit up and beeped, she made her apologies about leaving, explaining her brother was here to collect her so she didn't attempt to walk home. It was getting late. He had obviously returned home, from wherever, and discovered she was still here. Rose felt her heart quicken at the thought of him coming here. Sitting outside in his purring black car only feet away and pushed down the blush she felt rising. How the hell could that ass have such an effect on her? She walked Abby to the door and stood in the open frame, feeling the cool night air on her skin and getting hugged goodbye. She was relieved when she saw he had waited for Abby part way down her road, far enough to keep his distance, but close enough she could make out his profile in the car when Abby illuminated the interior by opening it, looking at his sister and saying something that made her smile. She saw him smile too, an easy, happy, natural smile as his eyes ran over his sister's face. He pinched her cheek and received a bat in the arm from Abby before they were drawing away and heading into the darkness. For an asshole, he really was incredibly handsome. It did crazy things to Rose's stomach in a way that was not entirely bad, but then enraged her for the ability to do it. Jerk. The next few days went by incredibly quickly. Rose was so busy getting into the swing of sorting out the rooms in the cottage in the last sweep of effort. She had made a huge dent. She could now easily use the rooms without tripping over boxes or stray pieces of furniture, and even Muffin had his designated cozy corner full of toys and a snuggly bed. All of her personal things had found homes, and most of the packaging was sitting in the hall, ready to go away. She had spent time on her laptop and phone sorting out her next illustration project, and had the dates in hand. She was awaiting the manuscript for the story, along with the author's notes on how she wanted the characters' scenes to lay out. All was set, and her fee had been signed off on. Her first payment in the bank, and it was making everything feel more final. She had celebrated the new commission by buying herself a dress online for the dance, and then felt incredibly stupid when her first thought was what he would think of it. This really bad habit he had of creeping into her mind unexpectedly, and then she would slap it away again, feeling irritation rise. She had pushed the thought down the back of the sofa, with all the ooze and dust of previous years, to fester. Thanks to Tommy, the gardens had been brought into order by a local man, Malcolm, and his teen son Liam. With the taming of the gardens, they had even added chicken wire to the back fence for her, making it Muffin safe. She knew Rob must have okayed them being here, and felt slightly miffed at the fact she owed him some thanks. There was not a single escape route for that fiery little fur ball, and he was now enjoying running around like a mad hound in the garden, rolling in the newly shorn lawn, and exploring the now tame flower beds, which had surprisingly been full of gorgeous wild flowers. She had worked out a regular deal with them to keep the place trim and fabulous, an inexpensive necessity that didn't infringe on their manor working hours. So she didn't need to be any more thankful to that arrogant sod up in his mansion for anything more. The garden was looking beautiful. She had been overwhelmed with emotion when she had seen the neat long garden with its stepping stone path to the outhouse's blue door, trim flower beds, and a washing line leading down the side of the garden. A small metal patio set purchased locally was laid out on the now cleared paving stones to the right of the door, and it brought back so many memories of back garden picnics on days like this. Summer tents made from bed sheets and rolling around playfully with her aunt, lost in some youthful game. As the week progressed, Abby came by most mornings for a quick cup of tea as she headed to the bus stop, a good 10 minutes walk out of town. That was the upside to both the cottage and manor entry roads being only a mile apart on the same road. Abby loved walking and just loved walking right in here for tea and muffin cuddles. Rose could almost set her watch by her visits and really looked forward to the young girl's arrival every day. She had helped move the remainder of the furniture in place in each room, carted boxes to the garden, and helped take a lot of packaging and trash to the local dump in the back of Rose's car. She had been a godsend in helping with the finishing touches and a dab hand at DIY, showing up one morning with a wheelbarrow full of power tools to hang up heavy mirrors and pictures and tighten some loose hinges. She had taught Rose what a raw plug was and the joy of a power drill. Rose had finally taken delivery of her new kitchen appliances, and the very helpful men even put them in place for her. Probably sensing she was pretty useless at any sort of manual labor that involved MOV-NG appliances and had no idea how to plumb a washing machine or attach a gas cooker. They had even removed her old appliances free of charge. She guessed her coffee and cakes delivered with a smile had swung that. The kitchen overall was not too bad. It was made from real wood units in need of a sand and varnish. But there was something so quaint and shabby chic about them that Rose intended to whitewash them instead of replacing them. Most of the jobs in the house were easy cosmetics, elbow grease, and just a lot of time spent doing tedious manual labor. All in all, she was finally getting the place to resemble the cozy home of her memories. It had not taken much painting either. Her aunt had only ever lived alone and had the paint touched up every year until she left. There was nothing that a wipe down and clean couldn't remove, and the majority of the walls were cream with stained dark wood beams and dark wood floor. She had found old sealed cans of paint in the shed and had managed to use the name to purchase a new tin for touch-ups. Nothing Rose wanted to change. She was in love with the mashup of old vintage furniture and new modern things in her cozy little home, and had finally found the refuge she had been seeking. In week 2, Rose and Abby had taken a 4-hour round trip to IKEA, a few towns south, and managed to pick up so many bargains that she had the whole place looking modern, yet quaint. Vintage meets IKEA. Somehow it worked, and was pretty much the home she had always dreamed of. Trips to town had resulted in meeting a handful of locals, full of character and charm. The old women who organized jumble sales, the old men who stood around waiting for the women to scour the second-hand shops on a Wednesday morning, and then on to the church, weekly coffee morning. Young mothers with toddlers and babies who frequented the parent groups. Kids going to and from the local schools who loved to hang out in town on lunch hour. The general locals who worked in every shop and stall and always greeted her with a huge smile and chit-chat. Rose had done more socializing in under 2 weeks here than her 6 years in London, and Abby was fast becoming the friend she had longed for since leaving home. It was on a morning trip to town that Rose stopped into the bakery to pick up cakes for Abby coming over. Lost in thought after placing her order at the counter, she was rummaging in her bag for her purse, head down and humming to herself on another gloriously sunny day, full of summer joys. "What's got you so happy, Penelope?" Rob's voice infiltrated her thoughts, and the sudden haze of sexy aftershave overswept her as his body heat came dangerously close behind her. "I'm in my favorite bakery, buying cakes. Do I need any other reason?" She answered immediately, half smiling before reminding herself how much she didn't actually like this guy. She glanced back to see he was adorned in a white shirt and jeans and looking his usual dapper self, which only made her annoyed with the way it made her feel like sighing. "Sweet tooth much like Abby. I can see why you two get on and spend so much time together." He smiled with a dazzling, almost sexy grin, but Rose just frowned and turned back to the counter to try and ignore his presence. "Easier said than done. It's partly for Abby. We're meeting later," Rose answered tonelessly, then smiled graciously when the counter girl appeared with a large white paper bag, fit to bursting. "How the hell you two stay so thin? With an order that size is beyond me." he observed with another smiley tone. Rose just sighed. Lucky, I guess. Good genes, she paid for her purchase, and turned to leave, but he didn't move to let her pass. She frowned up at him towering over her, a little impatiently, and sighed when he still didn't move. Look, Penny, maybe we could have a do-over. You and my sister are practically inseparable, and I think we got off on the wrong foot. Would be nice if we could just put it in the past. He pushed his hands casually into his back pockets, emphasizing his muscular frame, making it clear he wasn't moving, and Rose had to avert her eyes, pretending to check her cake bag contents. She said distractedly, trying so hard not to let her eyes wander back up or betray the sudden hot flush he was causing. Okay, so maybe he was a little too attractive. You could sound a little more enthusiastic about it. He jested, a hint of that Abby mischief tone that caught her a little off guard. Sure, whatever. She sighed and straightened up, meeting that intense gray gaze which was very firmly locked on her face in a rather disturbing way. Knowing that this was the mature and sensible way to behave, she thrust her hand towards him reluctantly. Rose, not Penny. Rose Turner, and I guess, your new neighbor. She smiled with all the effort of warmth and friendliness she could muster. Rob, as you know. Rob Monroe. And yeah, kind of figured you were in Olivia's old place, seeing as you're her niece. He smiled knowingly. Town Grapevine was talking about you for weeks before you showed face. He smiled again, having a little bit of an effect on Rose's heart rate and making her suddenly feel awkward. I guess that's the curse of a small town. Everyone knows everything. She moved to try and get around him, but he turned as she did so. I guess I'll be seeing you around a lot more with Abby the dance too. He wasn't smiling anymore, but his tone was still friendly, and Rose felt herself soften a little. He was really trying to be the gentleman, trying to be nice, and she guessed she could cut him a little slack. For Abby's sake, it would be a lot easier if she tried to get on with him. I guess you will. Abs keeps trying to talk me into coming up to yours for a tea and cake fest. She softened her tone and gave a genuine soft smile his way, catching his eye which still seemed locked on her a little too intensely. You should. Our housekeeper makes some of the best. You're welcome anytime, Penny. Would be nice to see Abby with someone. She spends too much time alone for a girl her age. That maternal tone in his voice pretty much killed the last traces of hostility in her. She was a sucker for some genuine affection between siblings, and he seemed like a protective brother. She loved Abby dearly, so he was only cementing a slight like for him now. She's amazing. I'm lucky to have met her, and we have so much in common. Rose beamed, smiling at the mention of her new best friend. Rob smiled too, obviously pleased. She had a rough time when our mother passed. I like seeing her smile again. It's been a long time since she was this happy. I guess I have you to thank for that. Rob's distracted by the counter assistant bringing him a large box, smiling his way with doe eyes. There you go, Mr. Monroe. Sorry it took a while. Aggie hadn't I set up the regular orders yet. The girl blushed his way and fumbled with the box a little as he took it in one hand, nodding down with a casual gesture, oblivious of the girl's blushing and obvious crush on him. He smiled back at Rose. Better get these up to the church. The old biddies will eat me alive if their book club meeting is biscuit-less. He waved at the girl behind the counter, causing another wave of furious blushing, and placed a hand on the small of Rose's back unexpectedly. I'll walk you out, Penny. Rose was too stunned to resist, and too homed in on just how many tingles his touch caused to refuse. He guided her forward out the already open door into the blinding sun before he removed his hand as he went into his pocket for car keys. It was then that Rose spotted the familiar black car parked across from them. Where are you parked? He asked absent-mindedly. As he pressed his key, the car beeped and flashed before making a telltale unlocking noise. Rose looked around for a moment, mind blanked and taking a second to actually think of the response. I'm not. I walked here for some exercise and a change of scenery after a morning of sketching over my desk. She moved to walk off and leave him to get to his car, but that hot, firm hand came straight back to the small of her back immediately. "I'll drop you home if you want. It's hardly out of my way, seeing as the church is practically in the Manor Drive." He smiled her way, giving her no choice as he was manhandling her effectively, and as much as she wanted to refuse, she found her feet, following him to his car, and standing politely back while he deposited the box in the boot. He ushered her around to the other side and opened her door for her, guiding her in effortlessly before closing it after she slid in. Rose suddenly felt awkward, confined in the small space as he got in, and realized she would rather have walked, had stupidly allowed him to coerce her without any resistance. She had no clue how to behave around him, and up until 10 minutes ago, had only felt hostility towards him. Now she was somewhere between shyness and, well, nervousness. It was too late to refuse a lift now. She was sitting in his overly priced man machine, and already scared to touch any of the array of buttons and levers littering the dash. "That's a really pretty dress." He cut into her thoughts, making her blush unexpectedly as she skimmed her hands over her lap nervously, to smooth out the floral summer dress. It was knee-length and a little floaty. He was putting on his seatbelt, and she followed suit, aware that his eyes did a small skim over her legs. Thanks. I like vintage-looking clothes, I guess, girly clothes." She couldn't look at him as he started the car, a hand coming to behind her seat as he turned to look out the back window and reverse out of the parking space. He felt a little too close for comfort, and her heart rate was elevated. "It suits you. I wish Abs would dress less like a homeless kid and dress a bit more like you. She has a severe weakness for ripped jeans and t-shirts with offensive logos. Maybe you will rub off on her in time." He winked at Rose, and this time she knew for sure. She blushed, annoyingly so. She couldn't help but smile, though. He was right about Abby. She did have a weakness for t-shirts with tongue-in-cheek prints and a tad rude. She was a student, and she definitely dressed the part. Abby is a rebel. Give her time to find her own style, and she will eventually outgrow all her cannabis leaf tops. She watched the road go by, the passing scenery as he got them out of town, and knew this trip would be brief. It was only 2 miles to the manor opening, and hers was less than 50 yards further. "Yeah, I guess. She's a lot like my mum was. Feisty and stubborn and loves to get a reaction from people." He smiled again. Only it didn't reach his eyes, and Rose felt a little tug of sadness for him. She couldn't imagine what losing your mother would be like. The thought didn't bear thinking about as her own sweet mother's face flitted across her mind's eye. "She is that." Rose giggled softly, trying to avoid the topic of death, which was still a sensitive area for her too. "I have yet to see her dressed up for the dance, though. I have no idea what to expect." Rose tried to relax back in her seat, but it was proving difficult when a muscular arm was stretched beside her as he tensed it on his steering wheel and rolled up his sleeve, exposing tanned skin and well-defined forearms. He obviously worked out, and Rose's instant reaction was to inhale quickly and look away. Knowing her, something revealing or outrageous. He frowned and looked in his rear-view mirror, a serious look on his face. "Like I said, Abby likes a reaction. In general. Or does she just like winding you up?" Rose laughed, looking back at the perfect profile and square jaw. He was clean-shaven, but there was a hint of 5 o'clock shadow that gave him a rugged look. "Oh, it's definitely to wind me up. She loves nothing more than sending me into heart failure. Payback for being a shitty brother when she was tiny." He smiled Rose's way, and then nodded as the opening to her cottage loomed before them too quickly. Home sweet home. Rose smiled and felt a tad disappointed that it was over already. From disliking him, she was warming to him and wouldn't have minded a longer car ride to continue this chit-chat. He pulled up in front of the cottage and jumped out as she was unclipping her belt, coming around to open her door and give her a helping hand to get out of the low car. She felt another blush creeping up when her hand hit his and was enveloped by it as he pulled her up and out. He took the bag of confectionaries from her and walked her to her door. Rose almost grinned with the sheer old-fashioned chivalry that was completely unexpected. surprised with his gentlemanly manners. He waited on her, unlocking her door before handing her back her bag and stooping to scoop up a suddenly appearing Muffin, who came running like a bat out of hell at the door opening. "Whoa, they're tiny!" He smiled and ruffled Muffin's fur. "Cute, and somehow you." He smiled lazily back at Rose, and then held Muffin out to her, accepting her little bundle of fur, who immediately went into licking overdrive. She smiled back. "Yes, I guess he is. Thank you for the lift." She hesitated, unsure why this felt awkward, and then held her smile frozen on her face as he made to leave. "My pleasure, Penny. Guess I will see you around." He turned on his heel and walked off casually towards his car, the confident stride of a man with a lot of sex appeal. He turned when he got to his side of the car and waved, standing as she moved inside with a small wave of her own as she cuddled in her wriggly fluff ball and shut the door to block him out, stretching at the spy hole to watch him slide into his car and expertly pull away smoothly. Rose turned and sunk back against the door, only too aware of how her face was flushed and her breathing shallow. Her body a little too on high alert for her liking. Okay, so he had an effect on her. She would have to be dead from the waist down not to appreciate his gorgeousness. Before long, it was the day of the dance, and despite being in town a lot beforehand, she never ran into Rob Munro again. Seeing him again, dressed in black tie and in his own opulent setting, made Rose shiver in anticipation, a dread overtaking her already stretched nerves. He would be on his home turf surrounded by his own friends and belongings, and she would be like a fish out of water. Facing him again was not really something she was looking forward to. He had a knack for making her feel awkward and out of her depth, and she wasn't entirely sure if she even liked him. Abby had promised to wait on her out at the front entrance, so she would walk her in, and they had agreed on 8 p.m. to meet. At least that way she did not have to look around nervously, trying to find a friendly face. She could walk confidently, with her friend's arm and smile, and look radiant instead. Rose had woken that morning with a very strange churning feeling that followed her through the hours. Excitement and dread at the same time. She was looking forward to a proper night of wine and dancing, good music. But her heart was thumping every time she thought about that handsome face and his cold steel gray glare that did crazy things to her insides. Now, she had made more friends in the town and had Abby. She felt more confident about going. But that feeling of nervous anticipation in the back of her mind followed her. She was so restless, she could barely concentrate on anything. She tried to sketch some ideas in her art room, tried walking Muffin to town and back to get rid of some of the pent-up energy, and only felt more restless. She took a bath at lunch and slathered herself in every expensive product she owned. Shaving and moisturizing, pruning and preening, and throwing on a light sundress to go sit in the garden. She felt like her nerves were on edge and kept checking her watch every 5 minutes, listlessly aware that she was counting the minutes until the ball began. She had cooked a full breakfast and lunch, trying to kill time through the morning, but only picked at both. Her appetite had deserted her. She had the cottage looking spotless and neat, and nothing on television held any interest for her. Abby was helping with the big house today, so no morning visits from her either. Maybe that's why she felt so agitated. Maybe she needed some company that was not furry with 4 legs. Maybe she just needed human interaction to distract her, and jumped in her car for the second trip to town that day. Poor Muffin was exhausted from their walk, so she left him asleep on the rug in the living room, snoring and dreaming of chasing some poor cat, his little legs twitching as he lay stretched on his side, and small whimpers and growls as he snorted through a closed mouth. The short car journey was pleasant as the sun still shone brightly in the sky. The weather had been glorious these past few weeks and had given her such a deep tan and healthy color in her face. She spent half an hour in Bella's bakery and finally reunited with the woman after all these years when she popped in to check on things. Lots of laughs and cuddles and reminiscing. The large round woman was exactly as she remembered, only with a few grier hairs and laughter lines. The conversation pulled towards Olivia, and Bella gave her many condolences and a bag of cream confectionaries. From there, she found the church was having an outdoor stall in the town center and selling jumble and books. That killed a lot of time and lots of small talk with the knitting club, who loved nothing more than to shower Rose in affection. They called her their adopted grandchild. They gave her a free crochet mug mat for her desk and a bag of dog cookies. For the now famous Muffin. Everyone in town loved Muffin, her small furry friend, always happy to see him and shower him with smooches and hugs, treats under the table. They liked to think Rose couldn't see, but she chose to turn a blind eye. Although of late his little pot belly was starting to become obvious, and she would soon have to curb all these extra daytime treats. Rose wandered around for a bit, window shopping and killing time, lost in her own thoughts. Not really paying attention, but trying to stretch out her day a little longer, rather than going back to clock watching at home and pacing her rugs until they were threadbare. She was carrying a large beach bag with a rainbow stripe print, which held all her purchases and gifts. Her long lemon sundress touched the ground as she walked, flowing loosely around her legs. It had a fitted strappy bodice showing off her tan shoulders and arms and her slim figure well. It was doing a great job of making her feel cool in the baking heat too. Her long brown hair hung around her shoulders in soft gentle waves, thanks to her new curling iron and her face. As usual, with minimal makeup and her favorite cherry lip balm, which stained her full pout to a slight rosy tint. She looked at her reflection in a boutique mirror and admired the change in her since coming here. It wasn't just the tan, it was her whole being. She looked happier, healthier, more relaxed. She fitted with this country living more than she ever fitted with the busy city streets and clogged air. Her mood had generally been lighter and more carefree. The smog-free air, making her feel like she could really breathe living here. She was unaware of how carefree and elegant she looked as she wandered about. Unaware that eyes had been watching her from afar, and as she drew ever closer to them, they did not dare to interrupt her. She looked so lost in thought and stunningly beautiful. She became aware of the museum looming above her as she wandered aimlessly about. Raising her eyes up, she took in the large ancient building with its gray stone walls and Gothic arched entranceway. The way it stretched above her like a massive foreboding castle, so dark against the bright surroundings. Huge banners gently flapped in the breeze, announcing the current exhibition, and she felt inclined to go in. Something pulling her towards the dark, shadowy entrance. The museum mainly held a lot of Scottish artifacts and history, but the side hall changed every few months to bring in new visitors. Today the banner displayed a modern art-themed exhibition from some aspiring artist who had been a local once. The artwork hinted at abstract, but she still felt the intrigue enough to venture on. She hesitated about going in, then took the plunge and walked forward. Penelope! The warm tones in his voice had an instant impact, and she stopped, that familiar lurch in her breastbone, swinging round to see where it came from. He was perched on a stone planter by the door in the shade. She had not seen him sitting there. God knows how long he had been watching her. He had on another white shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, and sleeves pushed up, exposing those rather hunky arms, a pair of faded jeans and white trainers. Practically every time she saw him, he was in varying degrees of formal meets casual, which somehow only added to his charm, and he had on sunglasses shielding those stormy gray eyes from sight. She felt a nudge of disappointment that his best feature was shielded from view. His short black hair was ruffled on top carelessly, casually styled. Unlike those London men with their shiny puffed hairdos and manicured hands, he looked relaxed and smiled. 1,000-watt voltage sprang from that smile, and all Rose could do was dive into her bag to fake look for something. So very important she instantly needed it. She was aware that it had become instantly difficult to breathe normally. Rob. She kept her tone even and eyes down, intent on her hands and their rummaging, trying to keep herself calm and sane with such a mundane task as sorting through, looking for a plausible item to drag out. And my name is Rose, She was keeping the irritation out of her voice, trying to sound light and nonchalant. Of course, she did not want him to know how much he annoyed her using that stupid pet name. Hadn't she already made it clear that it was not her name? Her heart was pounding through her chest, which annoyed her immensely. Stupid reactions to this man. I know. A voice deep and smooth, sexy. She heard him slide off the planter, and her heart beat up to gear. Her fingers began trembling as she sensed him moving closer. Aware that she was fumbling, I just think, Penelope suits you. She ignored him. Well, tried to, cursing inwardly as she still fumbled in her bag. Finally locating her sunglasses, she pulled them out and pushed them on, shielding her eyes and sweeping her hair back from her face in a bid to look relaxed and unaffected. Throwing on a sarcastic smile, she marched away from him into the museum, annoyed with how juvenile he made her feel. Well, have a wonderful day, Mr. Munro. Would love to stay and chat, but I want to see this exhibit before I need to head home. She smiled and made for the museum doors quickly, unaware that he was grinning at her sudden need for eyewear when entering a building away from the sun, or the way he was looking her up and down. She heard him call out a goodbye as she practically hoofed away from him, and in return threw up a hand in a wave that implied indifference. She would be damned if she let him see how much he got to her. Her heart rate was competing in the Olympics, and she felt slightly faint. Oh my God. Why did this guy invoke such trauma to her? Just by being near, she immediately dashed behind a pillar at the open wooden door and turned to peek out. He was walking away. That manly walk that real guys have when it's not really a swagger but not really a weak girly trot. Just a typical guy walk, all wide shoulders and strong legs and going about his day, unaware of the crazy woman peeking out at him from the darkness of the building. What was he doing here anyway? Did he not have a dance to organize? To oversee? To lord over? She pulled herself away as he turned out of sight, leaning back against the wall behind her to gather herself and take some deep breaths, sighing as she tried to push the picture of his tight, jean-clad butt out of her mind's eye, cursing herself at the lack of ability to do so. The coldness of the stone in this dark corner, tucked behind the pillar, made her feel instantly calmer. Hidden from his view, somehow sobering and grounding her. She really hated the way he caused her to self-implode like this at every meeting. If he knew how much he affected her, he would probably enjoy it. He seemed like the kind of guy who would get a kick out of it. She pulled her glasses back off her face and threw them in her bag. Excellent choice, Rose. Sunglasses in a dark building. Could you be any more obvious? She smoothed down her dress and bravely walked back into the light of the room, acting as though nothing had happened. Hiding in the shadows was completely normal. She looked around the vast hall, deserted on such a sweltering day, and tried to find some poster or sign with information, or at least directions to the art exhibit. While in Rome, there were large wooden doors to the left and right, but both firmly shut with no entry signs screwed in place. She figured she would kill some time surrounded by art, which always had such a soothing effect, and try and forget what that smooth voice and dazzling smile had done to her. Not that it had been an effect in a good way. Hell no. It rattled her in a really, really bad way, in a he's so annoying and irritating way. Such a jerk with a nice ass and a pair of jeans though. Damn him. Her heartbeat was finally trying to regain its previous calm rhythm, but her hands were still trembling. She pushed it away and focused ahead. The large hall echoed as her sandals clipped and clopped across to a wall-mounted glass case at the far end with huge welcome signs hanging from the ceiling. Inside, all the information she had been seeking, and an array of small artifacts surrounded the posters and brass-etched signs on glass floating shelves. There was a door off to her left, with an office plaque above and a red rope stretched across, preventing her from venturing further. There was a glass sliding window beside the glass case, with a large etched sign reading "Admissions" above it, and a clearly placed bell to ring for assistance. The entry fees were printed on a laminated A card, propped up in the sliding window, and a cheery old lady with curly gray hair was sitting inside with her nose stuck in some trashy novel. Rather than ring the bell, Rose instead gently knocked on the glass, smiling. Once she had purchased her entry ticket, the lady came out and moved the rope for her to pass and pointed her in the direction she had been seeking. The museum was much like most she had been in. Large, old-world, airy buildings with polished floors, old wood stairs and beams, glass cabinets, and that distinct musty smell of old things. Large Gothic windows kept the place bright and were draped with heavy red curtains with gold tassels. The windows, however, were frosted so she could not see out into the surroundings. That familiar echoed noise that caused people to whisper as she moved around the polished floors slowly. The halls she passed through had the odd browsing tourist peering into the lines of cases and displays. She could hear some sort of documentary film playing somewhere in another room, the noise faintly echoing throughout, and the sounds of a battle thrashing to some bagpipe music. Overall, the place was deserted. The art exhibit was in one of the rear halls, at the furthest part of the museum. A huge white-walled room with soft floaty music gently pouring over you as you entered. There was a table set up with pictures and information about the artist and a pile of brochures. She browsed the pamphlet quickly, taking in the man's mature face and gray hair, his background history, and the basis behind his work before turning and strolling eagerly into the room. There were huge abstract paintings on the walls, and large sculptures stood on plinths dotted around. Nothing she could identify as a real object, just more abstract design made from various mediums in a flowing graduation of color. It was almost as though someone had melted a wax rainbow and frozen it mid-pour. He seemed to like working through color graduations, sometimes sticking to one color and working through tones, and sometimes the entire spectrum running from one blended color to another. She found herself captivated by all the colors and fluidity in his work, like being pulled into a colorful dream in a magical wonderland made of melted things. She could see why a lot of his words related to flowing and freedom in the descriptive plaques. Standing to ponder a large, almost sunset-like pieces on a stand in the corner, and lost in thought when a voice interrupted her. "Afternoon, ma'am. You like that one?" It was an easy American drawl, Southern-sounding and male. She was slightly startled, but smiled, covering her reactions and keeping her focus on the art piece. "Yes, there's something about it, like you're standing on a tropical beach watching the sun come up." She kept her gaze on the painting as the voice came closer and moved to her side. He was a very muscular blonde American, classically handsome in that chiseled American way, with piercing blue eyes. His hair was tied back in a ponytail and immediately made her think of the movie Thor. She had to admit, he was pretty hot. All women loved a bit of hunky eye candy, and this one was appreciated. "The artist is my uncle." He smiled, showing some overly pearly whites and a dazzling cheeky smile. She smiled back, blushing slightly, aware that all good-looking men had the ability to make her feel awkward. Maybe it was the ugly duckling syndrome, from being a none too attractive child in puberty. "So, is that why you're here? Are you the muscle to make sure people admire his work?" She laughed and turned more towards this handsome stranger, feeling truly geeky in mentioning his muscles in such a lame line. "Something like that." He was standing with his hands behind his back, his chest straining behind a gray t-shirt with a designer logo and a pair of jeans straining at his footballer's thighs. "I came with him for the trip when they asked him to show his work here. He stays in the USA now then?" "Yeah. He moved out there a few years ago. He married my aunt when she came over for a little Scottish holiday, and they spent a long time living here before heading back to the States." He smiled Rose's way, his eyes skimming her appreciatively, and Rose ignored the slight feeling of uneasiness. "I guess you're close then, seeing as you came with him." She tried to ignore the way he was fixated on the tight bodice of her dress and crossed her arms over her waist in a bid to cover up a little. "Yeah, we are. He's a good guy and I needed a break. I have an injury that's healing." He pointed down to his knee in a manner which suggested he probably was someone who played football. The build on him suggested American football. I couldn't resist a trip to Scotland to see some castles and haggis. His winning smile again had her smiling too, putting her back at ease and forgiving the way he had been ogling her. There was something about his easy manner and a quick smile that made Rose feel a little at ease. Maybe it was just a pretty face had the ability to make you relax. Although that seemed to be the opposite for Rob Monroe. That handsome face most certainly didn't make her feel at ease. He walked with her to the next painting, explaining his injury more and his sabbatical. He was from Arizona, hence the southern drawl, and was a career sportsman. He seemed to have a celebrity status back home and was enjoying the peace and quiet of being a no-one in this country. He also seemed to enjoy talking about himself without coaxing. Somehow Rose found it a little arrogant. They admired the next work of art briefly, pointing out the colors and flow of the piece before moving on quickly. Rose was starting to feel listless again and wanted him to let her browse alone again. He seemed like a decent guy, if not a little bit too self-absorbed. He made all the right noises and acted like an adult anyway. His name was Matt. Very American, and he was 29, single, and owned his own ranch. Rose could not help but think of a ton of Mills and Boone romance books that reeked of romantic heroes like him, and the very thought made her blush a little more. It was so stupid. He was hanging out at the museum while his uncle was upstairs in one of the curator's offices, discussing some minute details over a painting that had been offered for sale. He was his driver and bodyguard, not that he needed it, but the pretense of his needing his nephew stopped Matt feeling like a third wheel. Rose was trying to wander off and put space between them unsuccessfully. When Matt's uncle appeared with a tall woman at the door, Rose was immediately captivated by the woman's tailored perfection. Cream and black Chanel suit on her tall supermodel body. Her dark red curls falling like a tumbling brook from the top of her head and her glittering green almond eyes. Black expertly applied winged eyeliner set in a pale flawless skin with peachy tones and a spattering of freckles. Her pouty mouth was stained with dark red lipstick, giving her a seductive yet dominating appeal. She was stunning in a very magical fairy. Like Way meets American Vogue. Businesswoman of the Year. How you would imagine a wood nymph or a naughty sexy pixie to look if she was from New York. She had on black high stiletto heels, peeking under her cream slacks and killer French manicured nails in deadly points, tipped with black. She oozed class and sophistication and immediately drew you under a spell at her presence. She gushed over Matt in an insincere tone, exposing ample cleavage under her suit jacket and a hint of black lace and a satin camisole as she spread her arms to kiss his cheeks in a very French debutante manner. Almost enveloping them all in her expensive perfume, her accent was only subtly Scottish, with an air of upper class and silky smooth like honey. She screamed sex and allure with every word, breath, and movement. It was almost impossible not to be drawn in by her. Matt did not seem overly susceptible to her charms, wary almost, and kept his distance once she released him from her embrace. He almost seemed hostile towards her. She introduced herself to Rose as Morag Spencer, the curator of the museum, then dismissed her with a smile before turning her attentions to the men. It was obvious Rose was in the way and the patron was sending her every female signal that it was time to go. Maybe not so alluring after all. Rose excused herself, feeling a wave of unwelcome warmth as Matt placed his large hand on her arm, pulling her over to kiss her cheek rather surprisingly before saying goodbye. It felt strange to have a stranger's touch on her skin. She was not sure she liked it. She figured back home that was a normal action to part ways, but it had knocked her for 6. His aftershave still lingered around her face, slightly catching in her throat as she left the building in a weird mood. Unsure why the handsome man's brief kiss had unsettled her, it seemed an innocent enough gesture. Common maybe where he was from. She could not remember finding her car or driving home that afternoon, lost somewhere in daydreams and thoughts of large American men running around the football field, except it was not Matt's face she was envisioning. Instead, someone with decidedly darker looks and grier eyes. 才到, why? Muffin was thrilled to see her, acting as though they had been separated for months and throwing his tiny furry self all over her like a hyper-rodent on heat. His small pink tongue attacking her hands and face ferociously when she tried to sit down on her bed. She barely had time to rustle up something to eat before she needed to start getting ready, and realized her answer machine was flashing with a ton of messages. Every single one of them was from Abby. Checking in, sharing excitement, confirming 8 p.m. at the front car park, describing her final choice of dress, and finally wishing her luck. Every call ended with "Don't need to call me back." "I'll see you there," Rose laughed. She figured Abby was as restless as her, and lack of physical contact today was turning her into a phone stalker. Rose pulled out her mobile, realizing it was switched off with a dead battery, and threw it on her bed. Okay. So she had to get herself together. She had plenty of time to relax and do her hair and makeup, pull out her new dress which had arrived a few days ago. Locals had told her that the dance was very formal. Evening gowns and black bow tie. It was all rather exciting. She had chosen a long, pale dress in ivory with layers of puffy chiffon in an over-the-knee length skirt, giving it an almost fairy tale princess feel. It puffed out just enough to look beautiful, but not so much she looked like a cloud. The bodice was fitted and studded with pearls, crystals, and embroidery, rather subtly along the sweetheart neckline in matching ivory. Its straps were wide-forming little cap sleeves, but leaving her shoulders bare. When she had tried it on for the very first time, Abby had gasped in awe. She had worried it was a little too bride-to-be, but Abby assured her that her tan skin and dark hair tumbling down from a romantic up-style would make it look perfect. She had pale shoes in a darker shade with high heels and peep toes, made from a similar satin to the bodice on her feet, that made her long legs look amazing. Matching clutch bag and her newly polished pearl-colored toenails and manicure finished the look. Abby had helped her practice a few simple updos on her hair, and her makeup was pure 1950s glam tonight. Black-winged eyeliner, subtle blush, and rose-colored almost nude lips, pouting at full capacity. Her hair, although mostly loose curls, was pinned up at the nape of her neck with a small vintage crystal clasp, and had let small tendrils fall and hang prettily around her face and ears. She looked every bit the princess from a romantic fairy tale. She suited romantic vintage clothes. Somehow, they made her look even more beautiful. Pulling on a cream cashmere coat her mother had given her for her last birthday in London. She looked every bit Audrey Hepburn. She took a few deep breaths, checking the time and putting both her purse and invitation into her bag. She had decided to drive to the dance, but Abby had promised her a taxi to return, leaving her free tonight to get merry and dance the night into drunken oblivion. Her stomach was doing a crazy rumba and churning with nerves by the time she pulled into the Long Manor Road. Other cars were coming and going. Lots of hustle and bustle, both on the road and the huge wide car park at the doors. Ushers were signaling for cars to park and deposit guests, and others were driving cars off the wide space onto a sectioned-off lawn. As a makeshift car park, fairy lights were hung in all the surrounding trees, and the fountain in the center had floating candles and magical lights draped all over. A small orchestra was set up at the entrance, welcoming people with soothing music. It was so opulent and classy that it was breathtaking, and she had not even ventured inside. Rose parked off to the side of the house in the area. Abby had described to her. That way her car would be out of the way for an overnight stay, and close enough to the house to leave her coat for later. As soon as she exited her car, Abby was by her side screaming with delight and twirling her around, swarming her with compliments on how beautiful she looked. When she slid her coat off and dropped it into her car seat, Abby began wolf whistling and again the spinning and turning while she admired her dress. She was caught up in her enthusiasm and started giggling with excitement. "You, my beauty, are going to knock men's eyes out tonight." Abby giggled and once again twirled Rose under her arm. Abby was dressed in a long satin gown in a gorgeous emerald green. It was slinky and clingy in all the right places and swept the floor as she walked, opening a slit from floor to thigh on her left leg. It had a draped neckline revealing her modest cleavage and thin straps on her dainty shoulders. It made the girl's pale skin and raven hair even more stunning, and she complimented her friend with the same enthusiasm she had received. It made her look so much older than her 19 years, and it tugged at Rose's heart a little to see the woman before her. Rob had been accurate with his revealing or outrageous prediction. This was certainly revealing, but still classy, and Abby looked stunning. Talk about me. Look at you, Abs. You are the belle of the ball. Rose beamed, looping arms and excitedly toddling on heels towards the bustling entranceway. You shucks. You make me blush, Abby. Jested and squeezed Rose's arm a little tighter. All ready for a night of schmoozing and boozing, Miss Turner. Abby's eyes twinkled merrily. Definitely. I need a good night more than anything. Rose was swept up in the excitement now, and her nerves were tingling. As they entered the grand stone stairs past the orchestra, Rose could see even the green of Abby's eyes seemed to have darkened to the color of the dress, and her peachy, almost natural lipstick made her seem so much more seductive. She could not tell her enough how beautiful she looked and how every young man's head turned as they walked through the hall into the main ballroom. Unaware the glances were not just for Abby. The air was buzzing with excitement and chatter. Groups of overexcited, happy people, at every turn a huge turnout already. Grand chandeliers hung low, illuminating the room with a magical glow. Tables set up with crisp linens at one end and extravagant lily and rose centerpieces. A vast dance floor with glittery lights and floral arrangements dotted all over on stands. And a wide sweeping buffet table full of delicious-looking horse d'oeuvres. It was the most elegant room she had ever seen, and she mentally tried to work out how much money could they surely raise for the charity when spending so much on the decor, music, and food. There was another orchestra set up in one corner on a stand, playing vaguely familiar songs with a classical twist. The entire atmosphere brought goosebumps of excitement to Rose as she explored the food table with Abby, admiring all the delicious morsels on offer. There was everything from seafood, delicious meats and cold pasta, to bowls of salads with dressing and chicken wings. There were rolled pastries and things on sticks she could not even identify, and of course a huge mountain of champagne glasses beside an array of miniature desserts. Abby nudged her as handsome men in black bow ties and crisp suits walked by. Winking at the girls, giggling girls in puffy dresses and tightly pinned hair doss followed with friendly grins. There were more people here than Rose knew even lived in this area, and half of them were completely new to her. Rose's eyes wandered around the room, taking in the people, the beautiful clothes, sparkly accessories, and the elegant setting. She was aware of the way her eyes were searching every dark-haired male face as they jumped from one to the other. No matter how much she told herself to stop it, it was like she had little control and the urge to seek him out carried on. Regardless, when her eyes met with the tall straight back of a tailored black jacket over wide shoulders, a male with cropped black hair and a tan strong neck, her stomach fluttered, and her heart skipped a beat. She would recognize him even from the back and at a distance, and that only disturbed her more. Abby was chatting at hyperspeed in her ear and handing her a champagne glass filled with slightly pink bubbly liquid. Unaware of her friend's sudden silence, Rose kept glancing towards his back, unsure how to react, to avoid, to go over, to pretend she had not seen him. As she was contemplating what to do, he turned away from the group of people he was with, and Rose got to see his face properly. A slight change in her heartbeat. Unable to look away, he was looking out onto the sea of people with a smile on his face. Someone was still talking to him, and his attention was wherever they were pointing. His handsome face looked even more chiseled in the dim lights, and his white shirt, black bow tie and jacket made him more like James Bond than Laird of the Manor. He looked so effortlessly at ease. He suited the whole bow tie, dinner jacket, set up, and Rose could barely feel her knees anymore. Her breath had caught in her chest and suddenly made her feel lightheaded. God damn it. How could she be so stupid? How could she not realize that every time she reacted to this man, in this way her body was trying to tell her something apparently obvious? She had a stinking, huge crush on him, like a hormonal teenager who followed around the high school heartthrob. Suddenly aware of this resounding fact made her feel immediately vulnerable, confused and emotional all at the same time. Like a light being switched on in a dark room, only to find you're naked on a stage in front of strangers. Completely shocked at her own discovery, and then an inward groan at how incredibly dumb she was. She winced, turning herself to the buffet and trying to reel in the crazy thoughts that were spilling all over her dress and table like a severed artery. Jesus! What the hell? How could she be so blind? Abby was lost in conversation with an elderly woman to her side over crab sticks and was oblivious to her friend's sudden life-altering realization, or the sheer crumpling effect it had had on her posture and state of mind. She glanced back, trying to catch sight of Rob again, just to be sure he did in fact cause these flutterings, lack of breath, and insane lightheadedness. This insane need to beat him round the head any time he appeared charming and stopped her in her tracks. That was her mind's way of highlighting how irresistible he was to her. Surely, Rob was still in the same spot as he had been seconds ago, looking like he was bathed in angelic light. If it was possible to have rainbows indoors, she would have seen one arcing over him. She was pretty sure she was seeing stars already. Maybe that was just the lack of oxygen, as breathing was near impossible at that moment. He turned slightly and revealed that, latched most purposely to his arm, was a tall, curly-haired redhead with a supermodel body poured into a figure-hugging cream dress. Slit in all the right places, leaving nothing to the imagination. Morag Spencer, overly sexed museum curator, was possessively spilling over Rob in an obvious way. Rose felt the last of her breath escape her. A sudden thud to the chest and prickling tingles ran the length of her body. Deer in the headlights sprang to mind. Rose dropped her glass of champagne, seemingly removed from the actions of her own limbs, and it snapped her back to reality. Abby cursed and jumped away from the shattering glass, as both girls then swept down to start mopping the mess with napkins in a rather frantic manner. Rose felt her bottom lip start to tremble as her eyes welled up, but they were ushered aside by two waiting staff in uniforms and handed a new glass of champagne. She had lost control of her faculties, in the most juvenile way, aware she was literally losing her calm facade and turning into a bowl of melting jelly. I need to go to the bathroom and clean this. She couldn't look Abby in the eye, afraid the tears would start tumbling, so kept her gaze fixed on the dampness on her floaty skirt and tried so hard to behave normally. Abby took her hand and dragged her off in the direction of the bathroom. "Come on, babe, I'll help." Abby smiled warmly, and Rose could do nothing but allow herself to be pulled along. She felt numb and distraught all at the same time. Rose began panicking as she realized their route took them directly into Rob's path, and as his eyes met hers, his expression changed from a cheery guy at a party to sudden recognition and something else. Something she couldn't fathom. An instant moment passing between them as eyes locked. She was fighting back every single emotion any hormonal woman had ever met, trying to keep a straight face while being dragged by an overzealous, slightly tipsy teen, trying to keep her face blank in an effort to get past a guy she had only just discovered she had a massive almighty longing for. For the love of God. Rob reached out and caught hold of her by the waist in a lightning flash move, halting her abruptly. Something he seemed to just love doing was putting hands on her. His halting them stopped Abby in her tracks, who almost ripped Rose's arm off. What happened? Rob's eyes flitted across Rose's dress, alarmingly close and still holding on to her. She could barely formulate a response. "We had a little spill, that's all." Rose tried to sound light and upbeat, but she could not bring her gaze to meet his. Her whole focus was on the hot hand placed across her abdomen through the thin satin material at her waist, no longer bringing fury to her body, but instead making her melt into a puddle and causing an inability to function. She liked it better when she thought his touch irritated her. He had moved close enough that she could feel his breath on her hair and his aftershave surrounded her senses. It was as if the whole room had ceased to exist, and they were alone in a little cocooned bubble. Abby used one of the end suites upstairs. "You know how busy the ladies' room will be right now." His voice was sliding over her like toffee sauce on hot apple pie. She did not want to move, speak, or even look up. She heard Abby reply in agreement before his voice turned back to her above her head. "You look really beautiful, Rose. Really. Just amazing." He almost whispered those words in her ear, as her brain manically realized it was the first time he had said her actual name, not Penelope. Were the only words she could formulate with him this close to her face, almost brave enough to meet his gaze. She instead lifted her chin high enough to focus on his bow tie, aware that now her forehead was almost touching his chin. The closeness sending goosebumps in every direction. It was almost impossible to breathe normally, her hands trembling once again. He really did turn her into a nervous wreck, with very minimum effort. Not tonight. There was something softer in his tone, he sounded breathy, and he was seriously affecting her ability to breathe. "Tonite, just Rose." As though sensing something unjust going on, the tall, slender Morag appeared, pulling at his arm, thus releasing his hand on Rose and pulling him away from her. "Ru'ub, baby, come dance with me. I want to be wrapped up in these beefy arms already," she crooned in a sickly sweet baby voice. And for a moment, Rose thought she saw Rob grimace. It was so fleeting that she almost missed it and couldn't be sure she even saw it at all. Sudden chill where warmth had once been, Rose looked away and then back, catching his eye as he turned her way for a brief glimpse. Something translated between them instantly. In that mere second, his normally light gray eyes were dark and loaded, but she could not fathom the message or the look. Then he was turning and gone, and Abby was pulling her towards the hall. Her emotion caught in her throat, threatening to choke her. Looking back at him as she was dragged away by Abby, and he was dragged away by Morag, she watched him disappear into the crowd, taking her heart with him. Upstairs in the house was a lot less grandeur and old-fashioned. It was more modern and tasteful, like Hollywood celebrity homes. Unexpected and airy above the noise and chaos below. Abby dragged her along a long row of doors to her own and unlocked it. "Rob made us all get locks on the doors to our personal rooms last year." She smiled, shaking her key, so that it jingled, that dazzling, beautiful smile aimed at Rose. When people get a bit drunk, they tend to go wandering, and although nothing has ever been taken from here, it's the thought of old drunk people having nookie in my room that bothered him. She laughed and led the way into a pink and cream-decorated boudoir. Rose smiled in response, but she was far from feeling like it. The cool, calm exterior was quick at having a soothing effect on her, providing her with a much-needed breathing space. Abby's room was everything Rose had imagined it would be. Frilly, girly, almost princess. Like in a childish way. Yet surprisingly, a bookcase full of trashy novels and Jackie Collins books. In a way showcased the innocent, naive side of Abby perfectly, while hinting at the naughty unseen side too. A girl stuck somewhere between childhood and womanhood, with a foot firmly planted on both sides. The huge four-poster bed, layered with fluffy throws, pink sheets and satin cushions, was draped in white voiles, dotted with fairy lights. And the floor was scattered with the contents of her makeup drawer on a plush white fluffy rug. Her bathroom was white and modern, with the odd hints of pinks in towels and accessories, matching the room, and Rose immediately fell in love again with this girl. And her layers of personality. They were more alike than she could ever imagine. The girls sponged off Rose's dress, easily removing the champagne and patting it dry with thick fluffy towels in the large bathroom. Rose was beginning to regain her control and smooth away the craziness of being in his presence. rationalizing internally that she was being stupid and it was nothing more than a silly schoolgirl crush. She had no reason to feel upset about Morag. It was obvious that someone like him would be with someone like that. Rose was no competition at all. Not that he had implied she could be. It did not take long with the help of a hairdryer to remove all evidence of the mishap, and Abby teased Rose for her clumsiness. Something inside held her back from telling Abby exactly what had caused her clumsiness, and although she was longing to ask about Morag, something stopped her. The quietness up here was a welcome break and gave Rose enough time to pull herself back together again. She was being so stupid. She barely knew him at all, and what did she know? They couldn't stand each other's company for more than 40 seconds without arguing. 5 seconds of him whispering compliments, and she was suddenly a bowl of goo. She did not need this drama or craziness in her first month of her new home, and he was the laird for goodness sakes. If anything, it could make living here impossible, not to mention drive away her new best friend, and that would break Rose's heart. It would be a disaster, and such a mess if she couldn't stop fixating on him in such a childish manner. Giving herself an internal talking to, while the girls touched up their hair and makeup, she pulled on the normal Rose persona and straightened her back. A new resolve to get a bloody grip on herself and have an enjoyable time. No Rob drama for her tonight. She would just have to wear blinkers and close her eyes anytime he passed with his overly sexual date. Say, Tang, Guan. Back down in the hall, the room was alive with dancing and laughter. The sounds competing with the orchestra, and everything was in full swing. There was to be an auction soon, selling donated items from local businesses, and then afterwards, there was to be a human raffle. Rose found this hilarious. Many men and women in the community had put their names forward, offering to be slaves for a day, and everyone had bought tickets at the door. Rose herself, caught by the women with the tickets, bought a few strips in the name of raising money, then tucked them into her bag for safekeeping. She had scrawled her name quickly across the book, telling herself it was pointless. She never won anything in raffles or tombolas. Abby dragged her up a few times to dance. Sometimes young men intervened, pulling them off to dance beside each other, and Rose soon brushed off her school Scottish dancing skills and joined in screaming with laughter. Rose soon forgot about her earlier mental breakdown and was so lost in having a great time, dancing, eating and sipping bubbly, that she really got lost in the atmosphere. When a familiar blonde-haired hottie pulled her over to dance, she almost didn't recognize him. At first, the tailored suit and cut hair threw her, but that southern drawl immediately brought her back to reality. Matt looked so different with his newly spiked hair. "What do you think, Miss Rose?" He bent and ran a hand across his hair. Rose felt obliged to do the same, considering he was leaning in her face, running her fingers across the jaggy surface as he bent down like a school kid, showing off his new toy. "Very nice. A little bit of a makeover." She smiled and pulled back, feeling a little too claustrophobic with how close he was to her. It was obvious he had been on the whiskey already. He was very merry and seemed to have a lot less inhibitions than their meeting at the museum. Fancied a change. All you Scots seemed to prefer short hair over here. He winked at her and moved a little closer, sliding arms around her waist rather forwardly. Rose squirmed and tried for a smile, giggle and wriggle to get loose. But he only pulled her against him. "Dance with me, Miss Rose." His mouth came a little too near her face, and she leaned back to gain some space. "Doesn't look like you're giving me any choice in the matter." She smiled through gritted teeth, trying again to loosen his hold, but he seemed oblivious to her discomfort. "I can't pass up having the prettiest girl in the room in my arms, can I?" He again pulled her hard against him, and Rose realized this was futile. She didn't want to be rude and cause a scene. Despite not really wanting to be stuck in this American Thor's overly muscular arms, she knew a dance was harmless. He swung her around the floor to a fast-paced jig as soon as the music started, despite her protests to dance, and dragged her heaving and panting back up to him when she tried to escape. Abby was wrapped in the arms of a hefty younger lad with strawberry blonde hair and farmer's rosy cheeks and offered no salvation for poor Rose. Abby was practically nose to nose with him as he was telling her something so obviously interesting. Her eyes were locked with his. A sizzle of chemistry between them that signaled Abby would be no help for a while, and Rose felt completely out of her depth. Rose felt uneasy as Matt pulled her into him for the slow smooch song. Not that she had managed to evade his grip even for a minute, but at least a fast-paced song had offered her some body space. This song, however, seemed to give him an excuse to haul her against him hard. It felt weird and awkward being held against his torso. When he locked her fingers in his huge bare hand and pulled them to his mouth to nibble, she couldn't resist the urge to glance around wondering where Rob was. Almost praying for anyone to save her, she squirmed her hand free and tried again to wiggle some room between them with no avail. Like casting out a safety net and looking to see dry land, she looked out across the room again, praying for a glimpse of Rob to distract her from her fate worse than death. She caught his eye across the room momentarily, unable to read the expression on his face, but he was facing this way. Watching the dancers, watching her, his overly slutty, serpent lady, practically humping his leg. She was whispering something in his ear and stroking his cheek with her long red fingernails as he stared practically blankly at the dancers. He seemed oblivious to the sweet nothings being whispered at him. His eyes focused intently on her. Rose felt a shiver run up inside her and turned back to concentrate on what Matt was saying loudly into the side of her face. It was so hard to concentrate, aware of eyes burning into her from across the room, aware that he was watching her, and that she had no idea of a single thing Matt had said for the last 3 minutes. She had been so lost in her own brain, and he was now staring at her in a really odd way. What now? Sorry, the music. I didn't hear, she focused back in his face apologetically. I said. What about you let me walk you home after this? I heard you live close by. He had a smarmy kind of smile on his face, and his eyes were narrowed lustily. His focus was on her mouth and making it blatantly obvious where his mind was heading. Rose immediately felt her stomach drop from its happy nesting place to the floor, and her face went cold as the blood escaped from the closest orifice. Panic. Cringe. He wanted to take her home. She knew only too well in grown-up terms what that meant. Shit, shit, shit. Rose wasn't one to have random one-night stands, even with hot muscular American romance heroes, especially not with ones who had a look of a predator about to devour some innocent prey. She was physically beginning to recoil. Even without a stinking crush on another hot man, she still wouldn't have been inclined to do so. She began making fumbling excuses about staying with Abby tonight and maybe another time. Like, never. Rose's eternal need to be polite was sometimes a curse, and wished she had Abby's blunt ability to tell people to get lost. She was almost willing the song to end, to give her an excuse to bolt from his overzealous grip to the ladies' room. He was not buying any of it and holding her a little too close for comfort, his mouth descending no matter how much she turned and tried to dodge it. The song was incredibly long, and he was taking no form of no as an answer. Oh my God. How the heck was she going to get out of this one? His grip was like a vice, and he had no intention of letting her flee. Can I cut in? Like a warm sunrise over a chilly morning. That familiar voice coming over her, bringing with it the effect it always seemed to have on her, melting her bones. Rob's voice stayed her crazy manic panic. He expertly maneuvered the pair apart, effortlessly shielding Rose behind his body in one swift move, his height and build equaling that of Matt. Sorry mate, we just have something to discuss that can't wait. Business, he said smoothly to the other man, with a cheeky tone to his voice, a tone that also carried a hint of authority. Matt shrugged and dived forward, planting a kiss on Rose's cheek before informing her he would be at the bar when she was done. It was obvious he wasn't going to argue with Rob, but he was still trying to make a claim on Rose. She resisted the urge to wipe her face in revolt. Instead, faking a smile and shuddering inwardly. Rose almost melted into Rob's arms with relief as he turned her, pulling her into dance against him, a lot softer than the yank had been, a lot more welcoming too. Even though she barely knew him, there was something about being in his arms that felt familiar, that his presence made her feel safe and at home. No awkwardness or uneasiness. Just a sense of belonging. And of course, a rising heat deep down inside her that came from being hot for his body. A complete contrast to how she had felt with Matt wrapped around her. Panic dispersed, nerves calmed. The noise drowning into the background with her tipsy mood returned. He was watching Matt walk away across the crowded floor and not meeting her gaze just yet. Giving her time to revel in the closeness, to gaze at his perfect profile and the way his eyes changed tone almost every time his mood did. The smooth curve of his neck down to his wide, strong shoulders, and the perfect cut of his tailored suit. As soon as he was satisfied, he turned his attention back to her, locking her eyes with his and lowering his face towards her, so they were close enough to talk over the music, maneuvering her expertly, slow and steady. It was obvious this was not his first dance as he took control and made her feel like a Strictly Come Dancing contestant. She had to reel her eyes back in, aware that she should stop looking at him like prize meat before he noticed. "You pretty much just told me I was beautiful." Rose grinned, her face heating, and her blood almost certainly pumping faster in her veins. "There's no denying that, Miss Turner. Have to say, I think you could easily be the belle of the ball tonight." His eyes darkened, and his tone took on a huskier, sexier tone that made Rose unable to formulate a reply. His gaze moved to her mouth, which caused her to part her lips involuntarily, the urge to be kissed by him suddenly springing on her from nowhere, and with such an intense force. Her own eyes moved to his perfectly formed mouth longingly. He had the kind of mouth that looked made for kissing, sensual and perfectly formed. "I don't think your date would like to hear you say that." Rose breathed, almost losing her voice completely as he moved alarmingly close to her mouth, her mind obviously disliking his advances and hitting her with reality. He seemed to regain control of his senses at her remark, loosening his hold enough to let her relax on her heels, and again meeting her eyes, although a little less intensely this time. "I dare say she wouldn't be pleased, but you can't deny the obvious." He winked again, and this time when he turned her under his arm, in time to the music and pulled her back. He didn't bring her as close. "You're such a flirt." Rose smiled, although it didn't reach her eyes. The awareness that his whole demeanor had changed with the mention of his date had her wondering if she was more than just a casual escort. Possibly his girlfriend. "You effortlessly bring it out in us simple men, with your sweet vulnerable damsel in distress signals." He was back to light humor, and a wink in Rose couldn't help feeling a tinge of emotion that didn't feel entirely good in the pit of her stomach. "Maybe that's part of my method to reel in unsuspecting men." She sounded breathy and was fighting hard to control her voice. She could not break the gaze between them, despite her growing melancholy, and her humor was starting to wane. "I thought that trying to drive your car into them was a better method." His voice was husky and equally quiet, and this time he pulled her a little closer with a step, bringing her back in line with his mouth. It was as though the music around them had drifted far away, along with all the people and the rest of the room. Neither said anything more, just silence as they stared at one another and continued to dance. Rose was trying to extract the meaning in his eyes, and Rob seemed happy to just watch her there, moving slowly to the music, transfixed on one another, so much translating between them without any actual uttered words. The applause started around them as the song ended, breaking the moment and bringing them back to reality. Rob reluctantly stepped away from her to join in, releasing her and smoothing down his jacket. She felt instantly disappointed and realized that the heat had risen to her face as she caught sight of herself in one of the long floor-to-ceiling mirrors on the wall. She looked rosy-cheeked, flushed and wild-eyed, like a lust-fueled animal. Rob was looking a little shaken himself, and small glances towards her did not go unnoticed by Rose. Abby appeared beside them as equally rosy-cheeked and announced she was in love before Rob caught her under his arm and warned her of the dangers of telling a big brother that. Rose watched them, feeling amused, out of breath and strangely affectionate towards the brotherly protectiveness. It was warming her in ways she had never experienced. Abby's intrusion, giving both of them a chance to cool off and return to the previous mood. And give her a moment to wonder what it had even meant. Was there an attraction on both sides? When he released his sister, he caught Rose's eye again, an unreadable look and a smile. Just for her. Something in his expression, as he moved towards her, made her think he had something more to say. But that was brought to an abrupt halt when Morag slunk into view and draped herself across his shoulders. "I was so lonesome waiting on you, Robbie baby," she slurred huskily. He tried to disentangle her arms from around his neck. It was obvious she had been hitting the champagne a little too hard and was rather worse for the wear. He didn't look amused and looked at Rose with an almost pained expression. Rose wondered what it was meant to translate. "I'm sure there were plenty people keeping you company." "I've been less than 5 minutes, Morag." His tone was dry expression deadpan, as he was trying to unwrap her and place her arms around her own torso before turning her around to free himself. But she was persistent, like an 8-armed beast desperate to capture her prey. "Take me upstairs, Rob. Please, baby. I need you to take me to bed." Her speech slurring incoherently and her eyes were drooping. She was not so attractive now in this state, all the sexual appeal and classy control sizzling into a hot mess on the floor. He grimaced, casting Rose an apologetic smile, and once again tried to untangle her long, slender arms from wrapping around his waist under his jacket. She had a snake-like way of moving her hands into his clothes, trying to get under them. Any longer and she would be undressing him right there on the floor. Rose felt the jealousy rearing up inside her stomach, causing her to look away and down at the glass she had been handed by a passing waiter. "Sorry girls, I need to deal with this." He threw her and Abby an apologetic soft smile before he turned and scooped up Morag over his shoulder. She let out an excited squeal, and he walked her off in the direction of the doorway without another backwards glance. Both Abby and Rose watched them leave, Abby rolling her eyes and returning to her drink, and Rose feeling less than merry. Caveman-style exit, right there, dragging off his woman for some drunken fun, no doubt. He did not even flinch at the woman's weight, just up and off, walking like he was carrying nothing more than a piece of clothing. Rose felt her insides instantly crumble into a million pieces and her throat restrict at the sight of him dragging off his girlfriend. Confused by what had taken place between them even more now, that he was literally dragging off his woman to bed. Why did it have to be her, of all people, a born seductress that Rose had no chance of competing with? Why did he have to have a woman at all? One that was not Rose. His departure clouded her enjoyment of the evening. His obvious intentions with that woman making her feel emotional, she returned to Abby and tried to ignore the horrid sick feeling in her stomach. Tried to stop herself watching the door like a stalker, hoping he would return minus that wench and trying not to imagine what they were doing upstairs. Matt came and swooped her into another couple of dances, and she managed to convince him she was sleeping in Abby's room tonight, giving herself a respite from his verbal advances. Another couple of men in varying ages got her up to dance, and always gentlemanly they kept their hands to themselves. The life had gone out of her party mood though. She drank more champagne and began to feel a little worse for wear as the night went on. Abby dragged her to the bathroom an insane number of times to check her makeup and confess her undying love to her new dance mate. Rose played the part of an excited friend well, but her heart was now somewhere in the gutter, along with her enthusiasm. His name was Duncan. He was a local boy who helped run his family's farm. Abby had known him for years at school and always had a little crush on the rugged, quiet boy, but never had the guts to talk to him without others around. He was very homely in a handsome, capable way, tall, muscular like a typical farm boy and something gentle about his face. He didn't seem overly shy to Rose when she talked to him briefly, just quiet and mature. He could not take his eyes from Abby for 1 second, though, and Rose had a gut feeling that tonight was not a one-off. She would be seeing a lot more of this one around. Rob might not be too pleased to see him as often as Rose suspected was coming. Somewhere through the chaos of the night and the ever-increasing crowds of rowdy drunken townsfolk, Rose lost Abby and could not find her way to the ladies' room. She had been meandering and trying to lift her spirits again, wandering tables and drinking way more alcohol than she had intended. She ended up leaving by another door from the hall and crammed into a smaller hall, surrounded by unfamiliar faces. Pushing past them and realizing just how drunk she actually was, she managed to find her way to a quiet, empty side room. Tripping, cursing her drunkenness, and staggering around aimlessly, the door was open, and chairs had been placed around as a makeshift timeout room for people straying out of the ballroom. There was a side door to the garden outside, allowing air to keep it cool and clear from people having a cigarette, and Rose headed straight towards the darkness. The cold air hit her immediately, making her head swim and her legs begin to give way. She had not realized just how much she had drunk, and suddenly it did not feel so good. Surrounded by the darkness, she felt alone and a tad vulnerable, like she was trying to walk on top of a fairground ride, tipping from side to side and spinning. A drunk man made some lewd comments as he passed her, and walked into the house via the door she had exited. Her eyes followed him with suspicion and pushed forward further into the garden and quiet to put distance between them. She could see a garden bench under a willow tree off to the side in the darker part, away from the lights and fairy lights, and attempted to head that way, longing for the seat and solitude. Noise from somewhere behind nearby bushes floated her way, making her feel more in need of a quiet, secluded place, somewhere to calm her spinning head and lurching stomach. So, she ventured beyond the bench, further into the cool night air, passing the tree and losing a shoe or two in the process. She stumbled further on, oblivious to the fact she was now barefoot, hopelessly drunk and throwing caution to the wind, losing all care about what it would do to her dress. She climbed a small fence into a rose garden. Catching the hem on the fence, it tugged her back and caused her to fall over the other side. A magnificent ripping noise, she rolled onto a damp lawn and burst into fits of giggles followed by insane sobs and the need to cry hopelessly. She was not having fun anymore. Rose had never been a good drunk. She sucked at it hugely, and now here she was like a little lost puppy, crying in thorny bushes. She did not even know why she was crying. Well, partly she did. Visions of Rob and his lady friend swimming into her mind's eye. She was not enjoying the dizzy spinning that overtook her and made the world start moving around her. She did not like the seasick nausea coming up from her feet through her body. "Close your eyes, Rose. Make it stop," she started chanting to herself, unaware that anyone could or would hear her, and tried to calm the spinning around her, allowing the darkness to seep in and calm the turmoil of her body. "Rose? Rose? Wake up, honey. Rose, can you hear me?" Warmth was touching her face, stroking her like a puppy, and pulling her out of the peaceful darkness. The silky smooth, deep voice was so familiar, so soothing and safe. Rose did not want to open her eyes, but she did want that voice to envelope her, to make her feel safe. She was a little cold and it sounded so warm and cozy. Reaching out towards the voice and wrapping her arms around it, feeling its strength so close and so real. Reveling in the heat coming around her, "I'm going to lift you. Can you open your eyes for me? Or say something? That would be lovely. Only Rob can." She was lost somewhere between drunken darkness, dreams and attempts at lucid consciousness. "It is Rob. Rose, hold on." That sexy voice was like liquid honey over her. She could feel a warm breath on her cheek and smell a familiar, desirable scent. She felt warmth take her arms and wrap them around something equally hot and firm, enjoying the feeling. but immediately opening her eyes in fear as she was hoisted up. Nope. Not a good feeling. A spinning out of control, the world flipping sideways kind of feeling. Stomach flipping, and lurching kind of horrible, upside down reality. Her face was inches from Rob, and he was holding her in his arms, her skirts piled in front of her, and her feet poking out, pointing at the air. Her toes feeling the breeze as they were completely free from shoes. Where am I? What the? Ooh. Oh, I feel. I'm going to be sick. She panicked and gripped him tighter with wide eyes and a lot of disorientation. Rob immediately returned her to her feet, supporting her upper body and aiming her towards the nearby rose bushes as she was violently sick. A lot of alcohol, gladly exiting her small frame. Jesus Rose, I thought you were dead when I found you. He was still holding her as she fell back against him, resting her spinning head against his chest. His hand coming up to support her skull and one around her waist that was doing a wonderful job of holding her up. His voice was strange, not his normal soothing deep tones, but higher, full of panic or emotion. She did not know. Right now, all she wanted to do was lay back down. Leaning heavily against him, aware that she had little control of her limbs anymore, still too drunk to function as she felt the motion and movement around her. Pulling her into sleep like a gentle rocking of a crib and trying to keep the nausea down. It was best if she let the darkness move back in, keep the nausea and spinning at bay. Penelope, that's my name. She laughed softly to no one in particular. Back in the midst of lucid dreaming, drunkenness finding amusement at random, only when you piss me off, sweetheart. Rose the rest of the time. That deep familiar voice, that's what Rob calls me, you know. I was looking for Rob, but I never found him. Probably with his sexy fairy. The lure of sleep was making her incoherent once again. Rose passed out, not hearing the confused response or the journey back to the house into Rob's ground floor bedroom, past his office.